What we'd like to do tonight is start backwards with HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodesh, which is going to be the third Sefer Torah that we read from this Shabbos. And then we could go back to the Kriyos for Rosh Chodesh and then all the way up to Tazria. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. The emphasis here is on the word Lachem. It's yours. And this is the Kriya that introduces the month of Nisan and, of course, Chag HaPesach, Chag HaGeula. Okay, we'll try to... Good. So Hashem vests Kedusha in Klal Yisrael. And that Kedusha is manifest in this mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. In fact, the chasima for the bracha of the Shmoneh Esrei for Yontif is going to be Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanim. Yisrael, we are sanctified. And why is that an appropriate chasima for the bracha of Yontif? Because it's that sanctity of Rosh Chodesh that will determine all of the holidays, the regalim. And that ability to sanctify the month was endowed in Klal Yisrael. So Mekadesh Yisrael and the Zmanim. God sanctified us, and now we can sanctify the Zman. And this concept of Kedushas HaZman is so central to our avoda, and especially to Chag HaPesach. So the reading, of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem and the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh is a fantastic introduction to Chag HaPesach, to the Chag HaGeula. And what we're going to try to study tonight in the first part of the shir is the connection between Kedushas Hazman, to sanctify the month, Lachem, and Chag HaPesach, Chag HaGeula. What is the connection between the two? And keep in mind that the first of the Dalit Kotzos on the night of Pesach is the Koshel Kiddush. What is that sanctification? It's again, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh Yisrael Vazman. The sanctity of time. That is a unique gift that God bestowed upon Klal Yisrael, Lachem. It's our ability in a singular way to take Zman and sanctify it. And at the time when Beis Din HaGadol was in function, it was their responsibility to be Mekadesh the Chodesh. Today, we have what's called Kiddush al Pi Cheshbon. We have a calendar. And through the calendar, we determine when it's Rosh Chodesh. But if I've emphasized on many occasions that the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is not lost, even if we have Kiddush al Pi Cheshbon, the calendar, and we don't have Beis Din HaGadol. Beis Din HaGadol, the High Court of Israel, with regard to this mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, is the representative body of Klal Yisrael. They represent us. And again, I would ask you to open your camera if you possibly can, because the only face I see here tonight is my own, which is a little, oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. I appreciate it now. I see two faces, myself and Ben. So I'm very excited about that. I don't know if anyone else is listening. Could be they just opened up.
I can't do that, but I'll listen.
Oh, okay. But I hear a voice, at least a voice that I know. I know now that there's someone behind that little box over there on the screen. So that's very uplifting. I think I hear another voice here, maybe.
And yet another.
Yeah, we're here.
Oh, great.
Listening closely.
Okay, great. So we have a mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, which we fulfill even in our time. When there was a Beis Din HaGadol, they represented us. But it was our mitzvah, Lachem, In the absence of a Bezna Gadol, the mitzvah reverts back to us, to Lachem. How do we fulfill this mitzvah? In two fundamental ways. Number one, on the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, which in our case of Nisan this year was last Shabbos, we have what's called HaRav, and we announce the new moon and the month, the new month. That is our kiyum as Klal Yisrael to sanctify the new month. That's why we sing Chaverim Kol Yisrael when we make the HaRav, because we, every single minyan, every single group of 10 people that represent the tzibur of Klal Yisrael are represented. They're a microcosm of the entire community of Israel. So Chaverim Kol Yisrael, and then we grab onto the Sefer Torah. Why the Sefer Torah? Sefer Torah is the gravitational pull that grabs and attracts all of Klal Yisrael together. What we have in common as one indivisible nation is the Sefer Torah. And now we're ready for Kiddush HaChodesh. Number one, as we said before, through HaRav on the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. Number two, when we commemorate the Regalim, the various holidays, that itself is part of Kiddush HaChodesh. But as I said at the outset, why is this the first mitzvah of the Torah? Rashi raises this question at the beginning of Chumash, and he says that HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, Parshas Bo, Shmos Perkid Beis, which we'll read Amir Hashem in less than 2 days, that is the first mitzvah of the Torah. However, we have to deserve Eretz Yisrael before we can fulfill this mitzvah, and therefore we need to tell the nations of the world that God created the world and he granted us the land. But be that as it may, from the perspective of Taryag mitzvahs, this mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh was chosen by the Almighty deliberately to be the first mitzvah of the Torah. Why? And the answer, I believe, lies in the connection between Geula and Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kiddush HaChodesh. We get this mitzvah as the first mitzvah when we leave Mitzrayim and we emerge as a separate people. We haven't yet gotten to Ma'amad Har Sinai, but God already bestows and invests in us the Kiddush of Zmanim, of HaChodesh Hazel Lachem Rosh Chodoshim. And here, I would like to discuss with you a very important dimension of Geula Mitzrayim. We start the Haggadah with what's called Maschil Bignus Avodim Hayinu Befaro B'Mitzrayim. We have to understand that our forefathers were Avodim. And we'd like to emphasize the psychological and perhaps even existential state of an Eved. And that's part of understanding Maschil Bignus Avodim Hayinu Befaro B'Mitzrayim. And I'm going to throw, hopefully, a new perspective on how to understand the mentality of an Eved, what it means to be a slave. And my new perspective comes from halacha. The halacha is that an Eved is exempt from mitzvahs aseh shazman grama. Any mitzvah that's time sensitive, time urgent, that's generated by a time period, an Eved is exempt from that mitzvah. And what I'm going to discuss with you now is what I call speculation. It's Darshina and Taimei the Kra. We're going to try to understand the time of the mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. And why is it that an Eved is completely excluded from a time-bound mitzvah? The concept of time and the control that man could have on time and the ability of man to sanctify time, all this is completely missing, completely omitted in the case of an Eved. An Eved does not have the capacity to experience time in the deepest way. He does not have the ability to fulfill a mitzvah that's time-bound because he doesn't know, he doesn't have the capacity to sanctify time. It's a free man, a ben chorin, and only a Ben Chorin who has the capacity to sanctify time. The slave has no experience of time. Time for the slave is completely in the control of his master. He has no free will of his own. He cannot use his time the way he would like to use his time. He doesn't have the freedom. The Sforno writes that our forefathers during the 210 years in Mitzrayim in slavery ate matzah, ha lachma anya, diachalu avasana b'Mitzrayim, is referring to the lechem oni, the matzah that we ate for 210 years. The Mitzrim, they enslaved us, and they beat us, and they worked us every moment of the day and night. We didn't have a moment to bake our bread even. That's the nature of the master who subjugates his Eved, and the Eved doesn't own anything, let the least of which is his time. He doesn't own the time. He has no time experience. For the Eved, time fits into one of two experiences. Either it flows naturally without paying any attention, he ignores the passage of time. Or perhaps on the contrary, he wishes time to pass by as soon as possible. Let the time flow and go. He doesn't have the experience of time. What is the experience of time? It's made up of three different dimensions. Number one is what we call retrospection. We remember the past. Time is not just in the present, but we bring to the present our experience of the past, our recognition, our remembrance, our recollection of the past. And that's called the concept of retrospection. Perhaps the greatest expression in halacha, in the Taryag mitzvahs of retrospection, is the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Chayav Adam Lirsis Atzmo. He has to go back in time and re-experience Avodim Hayidu Lefara b'Mitzrayim in a retrospection of Maschil B'Gnus U'Mesayim B'Shvach, and he re-experiences the Geula, the redemption from Mitzrayim. All this is retrospection in the past. The other experience of time, which is very unique and profound for the Jew, is anticipation. We anticipate the future. We understand very well and appreciate that there will be a geula at the end of time. That la'asid lavo, it'll be umala ha'aretz deya. There'll be a period of time in which all of us, every human being on the face of the earth, will experience that ultimate revelation of God. So we appreciate the future, and with great anticipation, one of the first questions that will be asked when we get up to the Beis Din Shel Mala, the heavenly court, is Tzipiso Liyeshua. We live not only in the past in a state of retrospection, but also the future in a state of anticipation. We anticipate the future with a great longing. We want it to happen now. And then we live in a qualitative present. The present should not be seen as perhaps it is and defined and described by other nations of the world as a fleeting moment. It's here and it's gone. No. That's not how the Jew is meant to appreciate the present, the moment. The moment of time is precious. The challenge and the calling to us as Jews is to sanctify time. Lekadesh hazman. And Kiddush hazman manifests itself in the mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. Grab onto the time. Every moment is precious. Every second is a challenge that we should take advantage of. Don't let it slip through our hands like sand. Grab onto the present. Utilize it. exploit it to its greatest whole. Never let it pass by. We talk about retrospection. What nation on the face of the earth would remember in great detail the giants? Like in our case, we remember Rabbi Akiva, we remember Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, we remember Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and the Rambam, and the Ravid, and the Rishonim, and the Achronim. We remember them, we experience them. We take them in as part of our lives, as part of our essence. And when we read about their past, we learn from their past because it's part of our experience. It's part of the psyche of a Jew. That's retrospection. We don't view Rabbi Akiva as someone who lived thousands of years ago, or the Rambam as someone who lived many centuries ago, but rather these images are part and parcel of my awareness of myself, part and parcel of my experience in life and who I am. We open up the Shmona Esrei about Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. These are living personalities that still have a tremendous impact. We take them into our essence. That's what it means, retrospection. But we move from memory of the past to a certain reality, or you could call it unreality of the future. We go from things and events that happened to us in our national history in the past, and we live in a sort of unborn future. And now we get to the present. We have a great, glorious past and an even more glorious future. The present is meant to challenge us, to mold, to fashion, to create something that'll prepare us for the future, that'll project us to the future. Man is a free agent. This is what a free agent is all about. A Ben Chorin is someone who could reach these basic experiences of past, present, and future. Sure, we cherish the past, but we also cherish the present. And the valuable moment that we have, every single moment, is a challenge. The Bali Musar used to say that if they had one spare moment, they would take out a sefer, and for 60 seconds, they would learn to exploit and take advantage of that moment without letting it pass. Every moment is precious. Every second is precious. Every moment gives us a chance to experience infinity, eternity. And that's Netzach Yisrael. And we realize very well and acknowledge that even in a fraction of a second, we can realize our hopes and our visions, or chas v'shalom, the opposite, destroy visions and expectations. It's so fascinating that the halacha as a legal system is so sensitive to time. Imagine if Shabbat or Shkia would be at 7 p.m., just giving you an example. I'm involved in labor at 1 minute to 7. A minute later, that same labor would generate a capital punishment if I violated Shabbos, b'edim uba'asra, in a deliberate way. I can recite Kriyos up to 9:15 and a half. And if I recite Kriyos at 9:16, I have forfeited the mitzvah of Kriyos. The Gemara calls it Korei B'Torah. I'll get schar as if I'm reading part of the Torah, but that's not schar of b'shalbach of kumecha. And the difference between matzah and chametz is a mashu. It could be a fraction of a second. There are myriads of examples of where the halacha puts the tremendous emphasis on every single particle of time, because time is such a great challenge to us. It's an opportunity that reaches out and calls on us to be makadesh the zman, to sanctify. Time as an entity, and we have to jump in and experience that entity. And the first mitzvah of the Torah, Rashi says the Torah could have started and should have started with this first mitzvah. It's HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. Lachem, it's yours. The time is yours. Sanctify it. Take advantage of it. Don't waste a moment of time. And of course, we begin to understand that if freedom equals time and the control of time and the ability to sanctify time, then the Eved, the slave who doesn't experience time, he doesn't have any excitement in time, right? To him, let it pass by. I was told by people who survived the camps during the Shoah, they had no perception of time whatsoever. If any relationship they had to time is they begged for the time to pass under the burden of absolute bondage and slavery. This is the crossroads, the transition between Avdus and Cherus, is HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. It's the experience and the opportunity, the joy that we experience in time, whether it's the past, the future, or the present. This defines us as a Ben Chorim. So Mirza Hashem, we're going to start this Kriya, as I said, in less than 2 days, as the wonderful, great projection, the introduction to Chag HaGeula, the first mitzvah that we received when we left the Avdus of Mitsura. From HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, in the 12th chapter of Sefer Shmos, we move on, which we'll read again in this Kriya, to the mitzvah of Karban Pesach. And once again, I would like to be Doresh time of the Kriyos if I can, and give my own understanding and answer to the question why the Karban Pesach is so profoundly connected to the experience of Geula, to the redemption, in this case, the redemption from Egypt. The Torah says, and we'll read it in the parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, Sel lebeis avos, sel abayis. A lamb for each parental home, a lamb for each household. In the Mishnayos in Masechet Psachim, the concept of a bias is called a chabura. We join together as a group, we purchase a Karban Pesach, and we bring the Pesach al Shem on behalf of the entire group. In fact, the concept, the halach of shlichus, is derived from this halach of shchitas HaPesach on behalf of the entire group. Why does the Torah introduce into this Karban, called the Karban Pesach, the concept of bias, of chabura? It's a concept that does not reflect, that does not come to the fore in any other Karban. Only in one Karban does the Torah require this group, this mini community called Sel Beis Avos Sel Abayis. The Chabura concept is limited, restricted to this one single Karban. And I believe that the reason for that is because this Karban commemorates Geula, redemption. What is an Eved? Earlier we spoke about the Eved who has no concept of time. His master is totally in control of the slave's time. But there's another dimension to slavery that should be emphasized. The slave is very self-centered. He's interested in himself. He doesn't know what goes on to the person here to his right, the person to his left. He's eager to get that last morsel of bread in order to survive. He's out for himself. He realizes that what does he have? Maybe he has maximum a little single lamb. So what does he do with this lamb, with this meat? I mean, for a slave, to be able to eat roast meat. You can imagine, even us, for us rich people, we love a steak, a roast meat.
I have this week's Hamodia. Are you interested
I'm going to try again to see if I can solve this problem.
Hello? Did you buy it already?
I don't know if I can. I'll try.
Hello?
Oh, maybe it worked. Okay, then. Okay. So we have the mitzvah of Chabura in Korban Pesach. What does Chabura mean? You can't eat, according to one man, the Gemara, you're not allowed to be Yotze in the mitzvah of Korban Pesach alone. You have to be part of a Chabura. You're a poor person and you want to hoard the meat that you have for yourself. No. The Torah says you have to divvy it up amongst the community. The entire concept of a community is so antithetical to slavery. It's the exact antinomy of the psychology of an eved, of a slave. And therefore, on this night of Geula, the Torah tells us that you have a lamb, knock on your neighbor's door and share it with him. Create a community. And if I had to give a name for that community, I would call it the Chesed community. We sit around with B'nai Chorin, called Dichvin Yesei V'yechel. The first thing we say on the night of the Chag is we open up our doors. Come and join us. You're invited. You're part of the community. We've created a community, a Chesed community. The Eved is self-centered, but the Ben Chorin could be capable of joining a Chesed community and give of his own self and divvy out what is rightfully his and share it with others. Why is it that Chazal tell us that in 36 mitzvot, some of them are essays, some are losas, says, the Torah repeats the words, V'zachartem ki eved ha'yisa b'Mitzrayim. Talk about Inu Yager, talk about the Isur of taking usury over and over, so many mitzvahs, Leket, Shik, Chopeah. It's all Uzchartem. Why do we go back to Mitzrayim? The Mitzrayim experience is that of a Kur HaBarzel. It's like taking natural metals that are full of impurities and refining them in a furnace. Sure, we don't understand the many, many decades of slavery, but we know that as a result, we emerged as a special nation. And that concept of a special nation is the Chesed community that only a Ben Chorin is capable of creating and joining. And thus we understand that the Korban Pesach requires that Chabura, that experience of sharing with others, of creating a Chesed community. And last week, for any of you who were here, we spoke about the Sa'ir that had to be brought as a kapara for the sale of Yosef, whose ketonis pasim was dipped into the Sa'ir, to that he-goat that they shechted. Obviously, the terrible catastrophe and episode, the sin of Mechiras Yosef, is all about being self-centered, not caring about their father, not caring about their brother. And we're going to take that Sa'ir and we're going to use it for the Korban Pesach, right? There are two categories of animals that can be used for the Korban Pesach. There's the lamb, the kvasim, and they're the Se'irim. And the Se'irim represent a kapara for the Chet of Mechiras Yosef, because now we have to create a community of Chesed, the exact opposite of Mechiras Yosef. Let's talk about the mitzvah of Korban Pesach as dam, blood, together with the mitzvah of milah. And Yechezkel says in his prophecy, "B'damayeh chayi, b'damayeh chayi." One is keneged the dam of the Korban Pesach, the other is keneged the dam of Bris Milah. And these were the two mitzvos that our forefathers fulfilled before the Yetzias Mitzrayim, and in the merit of these two mitzvahs, God redeemed us from Mitzrayim, because otherwise, halalu v'halalu. So what is it about these two mitzvahs? What is dam? Dam means mesiras nefesh. Dam means when a Jew is willing to suffer. If you ask an Eved, what is his greatest desire? His greatest desire is to limit suffering. He doesn't want suffering. He wants to try to duck and get away with as much of life, of pleasure of life that he can, eking it out, as it were. But when we leave the state of slavery and we go into Geula, we shift into a new mode. We transition into the mode of Mesiras Nefesh, which might and usually does entail shedding blood and suffering, and that we're willing to do. We're willing to do it for the Almighty. We're willing to do for our brethren, our fellow brethren. And this is all because we've left Avdus behind. Imagine shechting the Korban Pesach on the 10th of Nisan in front of the eyes of the Mitzrim who considered the Tzon a deity. Who knows what the repercussions could be and what the Egyptians might do to us for shechting their God. And yet, we went ahead and we fulfilled this great mitzvah of Shchitas HaPesach. We were not frightened as a slave is frightened. We're willing to pay heavily, if need be, to sacrifice. This is the great transformation from Avdus to Cherus. And now the Torah tells us, which we'll read again this Shabbos, that we may not eat any chametz, kol ha'ochel chametz v'nichrasa ha'nefesh hahi miYisrael, but rather we have to eat matzu shmarteres ha'matzos, to watch the unleavened cakes. Whoever eats leaven, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. What is the meaning of chametz? What does it represent? It perhaps is a metaphor for something that's complete, something that is perfect, fully grown. We have 11 malachos in the Mishnah in Shabbat Gimel of Pas, Sidur the Pas, and the last culmination is Afiyah, when we bake the bread. That is the culmination. That is the tremendous, fully grown achievement that we achieve, and we're full of glory and pride. Majesty, we take pride in the fact that we completed a task. We've created something wonderful. And man's feelings of chametz are a little bit on the side of bloated, like the chametz is full of air. We are also conceited with our great achievements. Matzah, just the opposite. Matzah, no real air in the matzah. If there is air in the matzah, you better take it to a rav and get a psak as to whether or not it might be a chashash chametz. But we spoke about man being a little bit more childlike. I don't know if you remember this. This is in Parshas Chayesor. We had a whole discussion about this, that she was like a child even at the older ages. We have to be, in a sense, like a child. A mature adult is practical-minded. He's rational. He doesn't trust his intuition or his emotional feelings. He's basically in an impersonal world. And he doesn't even have the feelings to really experience Almighty God. He's too proud. And then we get to matzah. Matzah is the opposite of pride. Matzah is an intimate experience like that of a child. Matzah metaphorically represents clinging, longing for God. and trusting one's emotions, following that intuition that leads me closer and closer to the Almighty. And matzah represents leaving the Mitsurim. Mitsurim are the restrictions, the limitations. Matzah represents free man, no bondage, no restrictions. He's free and he's in control. He has freedom of decision. Ushmartem es hamatzos. The Torah tells us, watch over the matzos. Chametz is grain that was left alone to rise and leaven, but matzah is just the opposite. We don't let it alone. We arrest the process of leavening. We make sure it doesn't rise, and that's the shmira of the matzah. In fact, Rav's shita is that we wash the wheat with water before it is ground, before we grind it up and make it into flour. And from the point in which the grain comes in contact with water, it must be watched to guarantee that the grain does not become chametz. So matzah is not just the opposite of chametz. Matzah has to have a positive condition that fulfills matzah and generates matzah, and that's shmira. Shmira means we have to do various things to guard the matzahs. If the matzah is unsupervised, it's not matzah. Could be you're allowed to eat it on Pesach if you have reason to believe that it's not chametz, but it's not the real matzah. The real matzah is the matzah that you could eat to discharge your duty of ba'erev tochlu matzahs. That mitzvah can only be fulfilled through shmartem es hamatzahs. We require an extra element of supervision over the matzah from the moment as a grain it comes in contact with water until it comes out of the oven. All that is shmirah. And no doubt that the concept of shmirah on a symbolic level has to do with the fact that there are many loopholes and many mechsholim, impediments and barriers that try to bring us down. And we have to be steadfast and strong in our beliefs, never leaning back on our laurels and taking it easy. No, there's got to be a constant shmirah. Be on your guard. There's a lot more to talk about, but I would like to spend some time on the concept of Rosh Chodesh, and specifically the Haftorah for Rosh Chodesh. Again, we're not going to read this Haftorah, but I think this Haftorah for the occasion in which Shabbos coincides, overlaps with Rosh Chodesh, or shall we say it the other way around, Rosh Chodesh overlaps with Shabbos, is Haftorah is from Yeshayahu, Perek Samach Vav. Ko Amar Hashem, Hashamayim Kis'i, V'Oretz Hadom Raglai. This is what God declares: the heaven is my throne, and the earth my footstool. Eze bayis asher tivnu li, v'eze makom menuchas. What manner of house would you be able to build for me with a capital M? And where is the place of my, again, a capital M, rest? There's a very profound meaning to this question that's being raised here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe to build a Mishkan, a tabernacle in the desert. And Moshe is wondering, I don't understand. Less atar panimine, the entire universe, the glory of the Holy One, fills all the worlds, the upper worlds, the lower worlds. And now you tell me, build me a sanctuary? A sanctuary is a limited, restricted area. And that's where the Shekhinah is going to be restricted? Moshe wondered, how is it possible to bring infinity into the midst of finitude? For the absolutely transcendental God on his most high, the Shafer Chevyon, who dwells in concealment, to bring the Almighty into the midst of a small, narrow sanctuary in the physical world, which is controlled by physical law and bound by time and space? Shlomo Melech asks a very similar question to the one that is asked here in the 8th chapter of Malachim, when he says, God in very truth dwell on the earth? Will God dwell on the earth? This is the great paradox of the Mishkan. How to restrict Almighty God, who's infinite, into the walls of the Mishkan. The Medrash in Shmos Rabbah quotes HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response to Moshe Rabbeinu about the mystery and the paradox of the Mishkan. I am not of the same opinion as you. 20 boards in the north and 20 boards in the south, 8 in the west will suffice. I will contract my divine presence so that it will dwell in 1 square cubit. Amal Amal. Paradox. How the Almighty, through Tzimtzum, can restrict himself and his glory and his Shekhinah to a small area of the Mishkan. How is it possible, asked Shlomo Melech, that God will dwell on the earth? There are 2 directions, up and down, in the relationship between man and the Almighty God. If not for this parsha of Mishkan, our avoda would be to go from here up to there. We crave for a relationship with God, the Almighty, the Creator. It's therefore incumbent upon man to extricate himself from the physical restrictions of the earth, to ascend to the infinite and transcendental world and domain of the Almighty. Surely God cannot contain himself and restrict himself to the limits of material existence. So if you ask me, how can physical, biological man stand within the Makom Kodesh, the holy place of God? It must be that man has to somehow ascend to a higher level, to a level of transcendental. Mi yaleh b'har Hashem. But Judaism preaches just the opposite. We're not called upon to ascend, to leave this earth and climb to a different world, a different universe. Maybe there are other religions, lahavdil elf havdos, that believe in that. Man has to become an angel and transcend this world in order to be close to God. We don't believe that. We believe, on the contrary, that our responsibility and our avoda is to bring transcendental God down to this earth, that the glory of God should dwell in the midst of a realm of time, space, of physical entities that can be measured. Says God, I'm not of the same opinion of you. 20 boards in the north, 20 in the south, 8 in the west. I will contract my divine presence. There's a midah of tzimtzum, of restriction, of contraction. And I will contract my divine presence into an area of 1 square cubit. Infinity contracts itself through the secret of tzimtzum into the fleeting and transient present. The divine presence is now down on the earth, very much a part of our physical experience. What is Maimed Har Sinai? Maimed Har Sinai means that the Shekhinah came down from on high and rested on the mountain. God descends to man. It's not that man ascends to God. God descends. We don't ascend. All of Judaism is built and can be reduced to this one single principle. Eza Baisa Shativnu. I exist in all the universes, in all the spaces, in all the empty spaces out there, and yet build me a house. I will contract my divine presence into the cubit square of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Mishkan. What a paradox. But the message is very fundamental for all of us. We're not trying to flee from this world, ascend and break the fetters of this world, of biology and physicality. No, on the contrary, we want to elevate. We want to sanctify everything that's physical by bringing the Shekhinah down into this world. That's the message of the Mishkan. Will we ever, as human beings, comprehend how infinity could contract into finitude? No. But the lesson is so profound, to bring down the infinite Shekhinah into our finite world in order to uplift the world, to sanctify the world. And this is the Yeshaya Hanavi prescription. This is his prophecy that we read when Shabbos overlaps with Rosh Chodesh. And finally, Roman numeral number 3, going backwards, is the reading of Parshas Tazria. And I promised you that I would say something about Tazria. So let's see what we can speak about. Just trying to time myself. Okay, we have about 10 minutes. The Torah speaks in great length and in great detail about what's called mega tsaras. And this is a phenomenon of a dermatological, shall we call it pathological, sign on the skin of a human being. And amongst the various details and categories of Negoim, we might call them lesions of a Mitsura. And again, he has to take it to the Kohen, etc. One of them is called Baheres. And this you'll see in the 13th chapter of Sefer Vayikra, in the 19th verse, Baheres. I would love to read to you the English translation of Baheres. So I'll read it to you. Baheres. No English translation, at least not in my version. According to the Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar and the Medrash Rabbah right here in Tazria, Baheres is not just a physical manifestation, it's also something metaphysical, it's something symbolic. We might use the word a metaphor. There's a deeper message here in the concept of Baheres, which is a simon of Tumas Saras. Obviously, Baheres, a lesion on the skin, is not a good thing. What does it represent in the bad world? And Chazal identify it with Yavan, with Greece, ancient Greece. What did the Greeks force the Jews to do? Kisvu lachem al keren hashor, she'en lachem chelek b'olam haba. Write on the horn of an ox that you have no share in the God of Israel. Obviously, this is the religious persecution of the Greeks, but why did the Greeks force the Jews to write on the horn of an ox? Keren Ashor. Let's ask the following question. What does the ox symbolize? Of course, it's a symbol of nature because we need the ox in order to help cultivate the field. The Mishnah in Masechta Bikurim, in the 3rd chapter, describes this wonderful ceremonious trek from all corners of Eretz Yisrael to Yerushalayim to bring the Meiser. And the Mishnah describes the procession. The ox was adorned with gold and a garland of olives on its horn. What is this all about? The Greeks wanted to uproot Judaism in its entirety. They wanted the Jews to inscribe on the horn of an ox, we have no portion in the world to come, no share in the world to come. That's Baheres. Why is that Baheres? And how does that connect to the Greeks? Every existing being has 2 dimensions. We could call them form and material existence, or content, substance. Where do we put the emphasis? Which is primary and which secondary? One could ostensibly argue that form, the outward form, is essential, is critical. and is primary. And this perhaps is what the Greeks are all about. The ox is a powerful animal. In a certain sense, it's very gracious, mighty, and critical in the agricultural endeavor. It is really symbolic of externalities, of outward strength. And we decorate the ox, we adorn it with gold, a garland of olives on its horn. This is all Baharis. This is the Baharis experience. That which is outside and appears on the skin deep, so to speak. There's a very interesting Gemara in Masechet Erchin on Yud Amid Beis. There's something which is used to grind the incense. The entire sugya of incense is a very complicated sugya, how to create the incense. But there was a certain vessel, actually two parts to a vessel, a mortar and a pestle. And the Gemara says they had access to such a kli that dated back to the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. It was very worn out. So the Chachamim brought experts from Alexandria in Egypt, artisans, to repair that which was broken and to adorn them with gold. But you know, even after the Alexandrian experts repaired the utensils, it was really never the same. They may have succeeded in recreating the functionality of these vessels, but the real form that they were not able to do. And as a result, the Gemara tells us there in Erchin that the mortar and pestle were no longer capable of grinding the Ktoris, the incense. Yavan is typical of the worldview of the entire world. The focus, the emphasis is on external beauty, whereas Judaism is concerned with the inner substance, with the essence. You know, let's talk about oration. Were our great giants orators? My grandfather Reb Chaim gave shiurim, and he studied in the classroom, but did he give orations publicly? He actually spoke only twice a year, on Shabbos HaGadol and Shabbos Shuvah. He had a profound influence on the entire city of Brisk, and yet he was not a fine speaker, a public orator. I heard about Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, that every Shabbos Shuvah, year in and year out, he gave the same drasha. He would speak about the fact that we have committed transgressions, we acted as children, we were foolish, and then he would break out in uncontrollable tears, weeping, and the entire tzibur wept with him. So the great Gedolim of Lithuania, those rabbis were not necessarily orators, but they had such a powerful impact on the communities where they served. And the truth is that very often you meet people anywhere in the world, in America, in Canada, in Europe, And they're great Zionists. They wave the flag. They have great orations. They speak beautifully, expressing the yearning for Zion. But where are they? Do they make the attempt to live in Eretz Yisrael? This is the Baharis philosophy. Everything looks wonderful on the outside. We dress it up, but it's all skin deep. What happens to the Mitsura? We'll end with this. The Mitsura, if you fast forward in Perek Yud Gimel to Pasuk Mem Vav, Adad Yeshev Michutz Lamachne Moshava. He shall dwell isolated, set up his tent outside the city limits. And Chazal see in this Badad Yeshev of the Mitsura a striking similarity to the Avel, Rahman al-San, a mourner, who is locked up, so to speak, for 7 days in his house. And it's fascinating that the Torah requires of the Mitsura to render his garments, to allow his hair to grow. Very similar to the oven. But I believe there's one critical difference between the Mitsura and the oven. It's not just that the Mitsura is chutz lamachne, but badad yeshev. He dwells in solitude. He is not involved in the community. He does not engage in any form of social activity. However, in contrast, when a person observes Avelus, true, he remains in his home, but far be it to say that he is barred from social interaction. On the contrary, the community is obligated to care for him, to visit the mourner, to ensure that he's not left alone to deal with his grief and his loss. So that we should not accept an absolute analogy between Badad Yeshev of the Mitsura and the experience of an Avel for 7 days. We embrace the Avel. He's part of the community. The Mitsura is sent chutz lamachne. He is seen as a potentially dangerous member of the community. And that concept of Badad Yeshev is antithetical to the Avel. We have halacha that Yontif is Mevatel Shiva, and the observances of mourning are curtailed on Yontif, or perhaps suspended on Yontif. The Gemara tells us in Moikot Yud Daled that Avelus is a mitzvah diyachid, it's an individual mitzvah, but Yontif is a mitzvah derabim, it's a public celebration. And therefore the mitzvah derabim will trump the mitzvah of the yachid, and therefore Yontif is mevatel shiva. A Mitsura, on the other hand, will not be permitted to re-enter into Yerushalayim, even for the sake of bringing the karbanos of the regolim. The public mitzvah of the regel, which is aliyah l'regel, is not fulfilled by the Mitsura. We don't override his personal restrictions like we do in the case of a conflict between Yontif and Avelus. Yontif is Amidah Lifnei Hashem, to stand in the presence of God. When you experience the presence of God, you're in a state of simcha. And that's what Yontif is about, the simcha, feeling the presence of God. A mourner, on a personal level, feels very distant from God. But he's part of Klal Yisrael. And collectively, we will bring him into the celebration and the joy of the Regel, and Regel is Mavatel Shiva, because he's part of Am Yisrael. He's part of that collective experience of Amida Lifnei Hashem, of standing in the presence of God, the essence and the simcha of Yontif. The Mitsura, on the other hand, is excluded from the community. He's far away from the Mikdash. He cannot experience Amida Lifnei Hashem. And if not, then even on Yontif, he has to continue his observance of tzaras. Yiratzon, may it be his will, that we appreciate Kedushas Hazman, that we thank and acknowledge God with great, profound gratitude for giving us the mitzvah of Kedushas Hazman, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, to free us from the slave mentality and to appreciate the challenge of every moment of our lives and sanctifying it. Yiratzah, may his will, that we appreciate the message of God coming down and withdrawing from the infinity and restricting himself b'tzimtzum into the one square amma of the Mishkan. And we have to appreciate that everything we do, every move that we make, every time we exploit the minute and the challenge therein, we bring the Shekhinah from on high down, v'shachanti b'socham. And finally, may we avoid being in a situation of a Mitsura who's considered a dangerous influence to the community and has to remain badar chutz lamachna. And even in our moments, Rachmana litzlan, of grief and mourning, we nevertheless experience Lifnei Hashem on a Yontif, and Yontif is Mevatel Shiva. We should be zoche to the experience of joy when we achieve this lofty task of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, when we could build the Beis HaMikdash and bring down the Shekhinah, when we could avoid Baheres and appreciate and emphasize and embrace the essence and the content, not the externalities and the formalities and the form, but the substance of life. And then we'll achieve the level of Geula, and the night of Pesach will project us in anticipation to the ultimate Geula at the end of days. And we'll be able to experience time to its maximum and achieve Kedusha, sanctity, Kein Yiratzon. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
It's a great skula, by the way, if you're a Hasidic Jew, when they bring out 3 Sifrei Torah. Wow. It's very rare that we have in the Jewish calendar 3 Sifrei Torah, the 3 parts of that Shir tonight. That at that moment you could pray for Yeshua, for Parnasa, for Zivug, for peace, for economic security, for yourselves, your communities, your family, and all of Klal Yisrael. So when they bring out those 3 Sifrei Torah, have a profound tefillah, it's a great school of power. And many of our giants have testified that when they bring out the 3 Sifrei Torah, it's Shabbos, it's Rosh Chodesh, and it's also Parshas HaChodesh, 3 different Sifrei Torah. We should be zoche to all those Yeshuos and the ultimate Geula, B'mher of Yameinu Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Have a good Shabbos. Chodesh Tov.
Good Shabbos. Yes.
Chodesh Tov.
And